Welcome to the Indian Animal Studies Collective Table Talk with Julie Urbanik today. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on the planet right now. The Indian Animal Studies Collective is a very young group or collective that was founded just a few months ago by Susan Haris and me. Our reason for this was twofold, largely. One, we had the feeling that those of us in India who are working in the field of animal studies are a little isolated in the universities and departments where they find themselves. And it's good to give us, all of us, a platform where we can meet and talk to and exchange ideas with like-minded people with similar research interests. Secondly, we also felt that some sort of especially exclusively Indian animal studies needed to emerge, and that hadn't yet happened. And we hope that our meetings with others in this group, in the collective, and through the marvelous table talks that we've been having so far, we will find ideas, we will find inspiration to come up with an Indian animal studies. The group is loosely formed. So far, we basically have a Google group that anybody with a research interest in animal studies can join. And as far as we can see, it's also not geographically limited to India. There are also people involved who are not located in India, but have an interest in Indian animal studies. We've got people from the field of literary studies. We've got people who are doing work more in the field of sociology, ethology, and others that we also yet don't know of. The table talks are the first initiative that we've started with, and it has been very heartening to see how generous all our invitees have been in their willingness to come on board, in their willingness to make time for us and to talk to us. So, Julie, very warm welcome to you. It's lovely that you could join us today, and we're really looking forward to talking to you about your book. I'll start out. Yeah, Julie, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to thank you for inviting me. I think that the Animal Studies Collective sounds just like a fantastic development. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what you all are, how you're going to have it grow. But I really am happy to be here and talk with everybody.
Thank you. So on to our very first question of the evening. How have animal studies been influenced by and influenced other identity-based studies such as ethnic study programs, gender and race study programs?
I think that that's a really important question, as we are all kind of coming from different perspectives and working out what all of these different identities mean, especially for us here in the United States. These past couple years, under COVID-19 conditions, also we've had a lot of a huge growth in the racial injustice movement and sort of awareness of that and what's going on after we had the murder of George Floyd, which I think maybe some of you might be aware of, who was a Black man, and he was killed by a police officer here in the United States. And that both of these events, along with some other kind of prominent killings of Black people in particular, and even a lot of Asian people as a result of COVID-19, have kind of really, sort of torn the Band-Aid off of a lot of things around racial issues, ethnic issues. And also we have the international kind of Me Too movement around discrimination against women and sexual harassment of women. And, all of these things have been just kind of have been coming together and simmering to the surface. And it's actually, for me, a really fascinating time to be thinking about all of these connections, between gender studies, racial studies, ethnic studies, and animal studies, because it is, we see so clearly now how all these things are actually interconnected, right? And I think that people that are in academia just have an easier time seeing those interconnections because we spend a lot of our time reading and thinking about these things, right? But I think sort of the general populace is actually starting to see those interconnections as well. And I think that like within the academy, there's, animal studies and race studies and gender studies, ethnic studies have interacted with each other and kind of played off of each other in different ways. I think some of the commonalities at least in the US. I'm not sure how it works in India. But all of these different sort of identity-based studies have had to actually fight for their place inside of the academy. And we've had, there's had to be a lot of arguments. Why do we need gender studies? Why do we need a specifically different, race studies program or race and culture program? And so I think that, academics have fought really hard to make space within the academy for these kinds of studies to take place. And so the commonality there is just sort of like, yes, like we're all trying to be visible. And I think, another commonality is the idea of figuring out how to do this type of work within a historical academic structure that has overlooked all of these things for so many years, right? Especially for people that are trying to do archival work. Where do we look for a lot of these stories about, whether it's women, whether it's, the history of slavery or something like that, and animals, right? They're often not visible in the archives or in the histories that we've collected. And so I think some of the methodological issues of where and how do we understand identity issues over time are definitely somewhat similar to each other, right? And trying to figure out how to basically make that happen. And so, I can speak a little bit about my experience in gender studies because I did a master's in gender studies at the University of Arizona. And it was a wonderful experience to be in the program. That's actually where I learned that geography was a thing before I didn't even know you could do that. But, even when I was doing the program, which was in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was still a lot of pushback from to say, okay, I wanted to actually talk about feminism and animals, right? And I was just coming to learning about ecofeminism and the relationship between gender and animals from an environmental perspective. And one of my big heroes from that time was Vandana Shiva. And, so she's been somebody that's been an inspiration to me, ever since I started learning about all of this. But, there was a lot of pushback of why do we have to talk about animals? Why, we're here to learn about women, right? And so at the time, I'm saying, well, wait, why can't we talk about both, right? Or why are we creating a new set of hierarchies, right? And so I think that some of the struggles also between these different identity studies groups kind of have to do with this idea of, are we supposed to prioritize one group over another? Is it appropriate? How do we do that? Do we always have to be talking about everybody at the same time, right? Like sometimes we just need to have spaces for animals or for women or for Black people or for, gay and lesbian people. Sometimes people just need their own spaces to figure their things out, right? So I think that there have been tensions within and without, but there's just a lot of opportunity to really cross work ideas and methodologies. And I think a lot of that, especially with younger scholars, is really developing more. And I see that as an encouraging sign.
Thank you. That brings me on to the next question. Comparisons between non-human animals and their treatment and the histories of marginalized human groups are often seen as problematic and face a backlash. What are your thoughts on this? It's not precarious to try and bring these things together, but I understand the backlash in different ways. Because I think for people that are trying to explore their experience and their history and understand how the world has shaped their lives, over time or in different places, that is what is important to them at that time. And there really is nothing wrong with that. And so telling people who might be coming to sort of a conscious awareness of issues around ethnicity and identity or gender and identity, that they also suddenly have to also care about animals or they're not doing it right, I think it can be a turnoff for a lot of people. So I think that we have to be actually very careful and mindful of when is it appropriate
to try and make these connections? And when do we just need to set those aside, right? And I think, one way I guess I could talk about that is out of the George Floyd murder came the Black Lives Matter movement, which is, is still ongoing. And it's really, I think, even around the world, people have supported this idea of Black Lives Matter and just sort of raising this awareness of the structural injustice. But what we saw in a lot of the protests and a lot of the interviews around people is people saying, we don't want to be treated like animals. Stop treating us like animals. The police treat us like animals, right? And so for me as an animal scholars person, light bulbs and flags and all sorts of alert are going off. Like, wait a second, why are you saying that? But at the same time, it's like, no, it is completely inappropriate for me to say, okay, stop in that moment, right? This moment is not about talking about being treated like an animal, right? So it's like, we can do that after a lot of other things or a lot of other work is being done. And I think that there just has to be a lot of awareness of how things get presented and how things get talked about. I know that when I was first coming to learn about sort of feminism and animal studies, there was a book by Marjorie Spiegel called The Dreaded Comparison. And I think it was published in like 93 or 95. I'm not sure right now, but it was a very powerful visual study actually of the similarities in how slaves brought to the US were treated and how animals are treated. The idea of looking at the harnesses and the ankle chains and like the whips and like, there is a very visceral experience to read that book, right? And that was a really revelatory experience for me, but for other people, they didn't want to see those comparisons because they saw it taking away from the experiences of Black people, right? And I think that Black people under slavery, and there's just truth to that, right? It's not right or wrong. So I think how we're talking about this stuff and introducing it and having conversations rather than demanding things of people at particular times is it's just opens the door rather than kind of enforces this, I don't know, kind of policing of what we can talk about or not talk about when it comes to animals or people. If that makes sense?
Yeah, thank you. The question of what is an animal?
Anu, I just had a related question to what Julie was just saying. I've also been thinking about this, the question of animality when we think about other minority groups. And, it looks like there are so many possible alliances that could be made, but animality is always such a, in the category of values, in the hierarchy of values, it's always going to be the devalued value, so to speak, that it's always going to be so hard for an outsider to point out these possibilities or to discuss the potential. But I was also thinking that in the case of ecofeminism, that has been more or less, it's been done so wonderfully. And perhaps not just, do you think that is because the connections have been made, not just to animality, but also to the question of nature and the environment and the positive values that have been associated with that? And if that's why the connections have been strengthened over time?
Yes, I mean, I'm always going to be an ecofeminist at heart. And so I just find kind of from the get-go that ecofeminism and really working to make these connections between gender and nature and animals we're really at the forefront of trying to build, how do we think about the interrelationships of these things? Now, did they do it perfectly? No, of course not, right? Because they, especially when I was coming to it and they were writing in the late 80s and early 90s, they're working on their ideas too, right? But they did find a way to make these connections and without them sort of threatening anybody else, there were a lot of feminists that were like, no, wait a second, we can't care about the environment because we're still focused on, violence against women or something. So there was that backlash, but it's eventually become so much a part of how gender studies looks at the world, that it is these interconnections, right? I mean, interconnections of identity, interconnections of class, interconnections of nationality, of physical abilities, right? That we don't, like, nothing fits neatly anymore. And so I do feel that ecofeminists did have opened that door, quite well. But again, it's just, there's definitely like more work that can be done. And, even within ecofeminism, it was very white, it was very white for a long time. And it certainly is a fair criticism of that as well. And so, we're constantly having to try and talk about our ideas and reflect on our ideas, at the same time, which can be a very difficult thing. But I think for me, it's also a little bit different perhaps too, because geography is also very kind of synthetic discipline in the way that I was trained in it. And so it's not, I was sort of trained to think in almost like, everybody might be familiar with a GIS map that has all the different layers that you can add to the map, right? And for me, when I think about geography, that's sort of the power of geography, that I've learned how to see kind of all the pieces somehow at one time, right? And maybe that's true in other disciplines or not. I'm not sure if that would be true in literature, for example. But I think that, there's just having these conversations. These are the places in these animal studies, identity studies, locations to have these kinds of conversations, because this is where we are doing the hard work with ourselves before we talk about it kind of out there in the world, right? So we shouldn't, no matter what the result is, shying away from that isn't going to get us anywhere, much less affect any change that we might want to have happen.
So, Julie, the question of what is an animal in a given culture is also something that I find really interesting. And in particular, the exclusion of fish from some of the state lists of the legal definition of animals that you've listed in your book reminds me, for example, of the song Something in the Way by Nirvana. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's a line in there that goes, "It's okay to eat fish because they don't have any feelings." And animals have feelings, but fish don't, hence they aren't animals. So this was also my experience during my initial trips to Europe. In fact, whenever I said I was a vegetarian, people wanted to serve me fish, although for me, fish was also an animal and therefore meat, so something that I wasn't going to eat. And I noticed that the federal legal definition of animals in the United States is surprisingly narrow. In addition, in some of the other lists too, wildlife and agricultural animals as well are excluded. Horses not used for research don't count as animals either. Neither do cold-blooded species, although dogs, cats, and non-human primates do count as animals, even if they are dead. What are the implications of this narrow definition of animals for human-animal relations?
Well, I guess there's a lot of implications of this, right? I think that it is, when you compile something like that, the definition of an animal from so many different places, I mean, I would really like to be able to do that for every country in the world almost. I don't know if every country actually has some sort of definition like this, but it would be, again, really interesting to see, right? Because this is something like defining an animal just lays bare the just ridiculous amounts of contradictions that we have around them. And in this case, you know, that the state is deciding what counts as an animal, everything falls from that: funding resources, regulatory apparatus, you know, animal welfare checks, you know, what animals are property or not property, which animals sort of have rights to not be treated with cruelty or neglect or abuse or something, right? So when you're seeing the construction of what an animal is, I mean, you're seeing in the moment how we do socially construct our reality in these ways, and that these are political fights, right? Like, we do this for specific reasons, that, you know, we don't want to have mice count as animals in for research purposes, right? Because then if we had them count as animals, we would then be required to report on them or develop rules about how we want to treat them. And if we're experimenting on them, maybe we don't want to have that kind of oversight, right? And the same thing is also true for the agricultural animals, right? That if we kind of don't count them as animals, then we don't have to do any regulation. It's pretty easy. And so we've decided to have some basic regulations around land-based livestock, but certainly the aquatic animals, whether they're farmed or wild caught, it's just kind of a free-for-all. And we all recognize that they're animals. And so it's not, you know, it's just political activity that's benefiting somebody. You know, I mean, you can read it as, you know, under capitalism, you can read it as the power of the state, you know, however you might, you know, perspective that you might want to take, because they're all true, right? But it obviously it has implications, because it makes certain animals visible and certain animals invisible. And therefore we don't really have the capacity to understand what is happening to them, right? How many are there even going through research labs or, you know, factory farms, or being caught in the ocean or farmed, you know, aquatic species, right? So it has ramifications all across the board. And then, you know, internationally, right? I mean, if we in the United States are setting an example that certain animals don't count as animals, right? Well, then other countries may feel like, well, yeah, we could do that too, right? If the United States can do it, or so, you know, the UK or India can define an animal as this and not that, well, then great. We can do all of those things as well. And so then, you know, it's like you're scaling up that invisible experience of so many animals by erasing them from the system. And, you know, the political fights over animal rights and animal law. I mean, I'm not, you know, any sort of expert in animal law, right? But in the United States, at least, the rise of the animal, you know, animal lawyers, animal rights lawyers, they've been doing phenomenal work trying to figure out how to bring these animals, all of them, you know, at least to be recognized, right? But then it also shows the power of all the lobbying and the power of the politics, that people don't want to do that. There's too much at stake. And normally too much at stake means too much money at stake, right? And, you know, so I was really curious though, like, is there a definition of animal in the Indian government that actually includes all animals, or do you all have the same sort of weird carve outs for, oh, you know, cows aren't animals or something like that, right?
As far as I know, or at least let me say, I haven't come across a comprehensive definition of animals as such, which is not to say it might not exist. I do know that specific laws are formulated targeting specific animals. So certain things may be done to certain animals, but not to others. And which animals can be at the receiving end is usually specified in conjunction with that law. So there is clearly a kind of distinction made amongst animals as to how humans can treat them. I mean, certain animals really just count as bare life. You know, the chicken that one buys or, you know, gets slaughtered to eat them do not have any rights or any legal protection in that sense to being treated fairly. But cows do, and cows, of course, have special rights in India, especially at present, because of other reasons. You know,
Right.
So again, the kind of protection or the kind of acknowledgement of there being beings that deserve a certain amount of protection varies from animal to animal, and it's dependent on various factors. And I think how beneficial it is economically to include an animal under a certain law or not usually determines whether it's there or not. So I guess it's the same as in the case of the legal definitions you've outlined in your book.
Right. And I think that there's an opportunity for animal studies scholars to actually work with, biologists and people in the more kind of, hard sciences. I don't know, we call the hard sciences like biology and chemistry here. I don't know, we just have kind of a weird word for it. But because, biologists are the one that can stand up and say, this is actually a definition of animal, right? Like we understand these things, like we've looked at and we understand what differentiates these kinds of species. And yes, I mean, I understand that there's a lot of, fights over taxonomy and things like that, but still to have other parts of the academy join in animal studies and say, well, wait a second, it doesn't make any sense to say that. Right. There's an opportunity for forming relationships there to actually challenge some of that, I think, because we have, we want to base everything on science, right? On the one hand, which has been in the US, a big discussion under COVID, are we following the science or not? But in this case, like a lot of scientists could actually be really helpful in challenging some of these classifications that get codified into law about how we define animals, right? And in what context. So I think there's an opening there too.
Just to add to that, it's such an interesting question. And in the Indian Constitution, or I think in the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, which is the other important law, I think animal is just loosely defined as any living being other than a human. But there's a lot of emphasis in how humans should behave towards animals. So it says we have a moral obligation to be good to them, to not impose unnecessary suffering on them, which means that the construction of the animal in the society relies also on social attitudes. And I'm thinking probably on the lessening importance of concepts like ahimsa or just generally non-violence. So I'm just thinking, based on the examples you quoted in your text in the first two chapters, if legally defining them narrowly as animals used in research or something like that, if that limits the scope, because then you can just work with that definition in politics or in the court of law or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am trying to think of in any of our, like the way the law is written, if there is actually something that says we have a moral obligation to the other species. And I honestly don't know that off the top of my head. My inclination is to say, no, we don't really make any sort of statement about that. But these fights over who gets counted as an animal are like, it didn't come through so much of like a cultural process or a cultural idea, like something like ahimsa, right? Which is something that you in India have like a long history of this concept. We've been very instrumental the entire time, in settling and creating the United States around all sorts of different kinds of animals, right? So we don't have a lot to draw on. And if you're thinking about drawing on like the Christian tradition, which, has a little bit of a conflicting attitude towards animals. On the one hand, we're supposed to be, kind and nice to everything. On the other hand, we also, as humans, have dominion over the other species, right? So it is kind of a schizophrenic thing. And the way that it ends up getting codified into law is through the economic power, right? And so it's interesting to think how, in different places around the world, these definitions are different based on like the cultural background and the cultural history of the country itself, right?
Kumar has a question. Please go on.
Okay, thank you, Miss Julie, Anu, and Susan for organizing such an interesting topic to get connected with the people from different parts of the world. In research animal facilities, it has been said that do not perform euthanasia in the presence of other animals which are needed to be euthanized or survived. So, which type of horror or stress is going to be takes place to the other animals which are available in the surrounding of those animals which are going to be euthanized or where the act of euthanasia is going to be performed. Please elaborate this one.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, let me just make sure I heard your question properly. Your question is about, are there laws about performing euthanasia in front of other animals? Is that right, Biram?
Yes, just why to hide other animals or separate other animals from the animals which are going to be euthanized in the separate room or in the another room? Why?
Why should we do that?
Yes, and what type of stress is going to be induced in such situation if mistakenly the staff is going to place other animals in the same room, procedural room, where the euthanasia is going to be performed.
Okay, let me think here for a second. So why should we worry about whether or not euthanasia is performed in front of the other animals, or if they're waiting in line or not? And I guess the best way I might think about addressing that question is to think about, like, which situation are you talking about, right? So this kind of comes pretty directly right into geography, is that the where are we talking about this being performed,
Julie,
right?
Julie,
Yeah.
just to provide a little context, I think what Vikram's referring to is that in the case of stray dogs, if after neutering them, or in case of some surgery gone bad, and if they have to be euthanized, then I think the law specifically states that they must not be euthanized in front of other dogs, that they must be taken to a separate surgical room. So I think it does, Vikram's question is interesting, because then the question is, why does the law put an emphasis on that particular aspect?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Even
Okay.
for the rodent animals.
Okay.
And even in the slaughterhouse.
And even in the slaughterhouse, right? I mean, I would say that basically because it makes us feel better, probably, right? is kind of really the answer. That because it bothers us to imagine watching somebody being killed like right in front of us, that would bother us and stress us out. And so I think that it's also a way of trying to show that the law is humane as well, right? That look, like here's what we're saying is the best practices around performing a euthanasia if it has to be performed. In something like this, there've been debates, something like this in the United States around livestock, or even around in animal rescue shelter situations where you might have a surplus of animals that they end up euthanizing, right? So in the case of the animal shelters where stray animals or lost animals come in, and if they're not adopted out, the history of that has been, we just killed them all, after, 3 days, 5 days, however long the shelter has room for them. Over the past couple of decades in the US, that mindset has shifted a lot to, let's try and get these animals housed, let's not do the euthanasia. If we're going to do it, let's find the most humane way to do the euthanasia, because we don't want to be promoting animal suffering, right? And so The same thing is true in the livestock sector too, in terms of, and there's the famous woman, and I'm completely forgetting her name right now. She has autism, and she's done a tremendous amount of work to work with slaughterhouses about the most comfortable way to maneuver cows and sheep through the lines, basically from the field into the building. And, the idea that we're trying to create a situation where we are killing animals, but we're doing it as humanely as possible is something that works for a lot of people. And so I think that it's a place-based situation, right? And it also, again, shows some of the contradictions about, well, if we're killing them, how can we, what is the best way for us to do that, really, right? And I think that's a fair question to ask. We don't, if we have to kill something, it doesn't need to be so needlessly cruel as, the way that it has been done in the past. Can we do it differently, right? So it's almost like a step in the progress of recognizing animal suffering, right? But I think it's also largely to help us feel better about what we're doing at the same time. But even just getting that into the law is going to be a fight, right? Because it's going to cost somebody more time and more effort to say, all right, we have to do it humanely, right? And how do we then define humanely? Well, is it, that's a whole nother conversation, right?
Well, because we've been talking about euthanasia, I sort of think it's also something that really presents the point that you make in your book. It's all about geography. It's all about where we are in the world, on the planet, because attitudes towards euthanasia also differ across the globe. I know that in certain cultures, it's seen as a sign of kindness. There is an animal suffering, and you help the animal escape this suffering or put an end to it by the act of euthanasia. And in other cultures, including in India, in large parts of India still, although attitudes have been changing now, this was something that was seen as unthinkable, for companion animals. Even if old, when they got sick or they were suffering, people waited it out so that the animal died its natural death, because euthanasia was seen as unkindness. It was seen as inhumane, and this idea of putting an end to the suffering didn't make sense. I've noticed that those attitudes have started changing, at least in the bigger cities, but in the smaller towns, it's still the same, largely.
So, and I think that it is really interesting to think about because, even here in the United States, you'll get a lot of stories of even people like hunters or something like that, right? Like if they come across like a sick animal in the woods or an animal that's been trapped, that's just, is just clearly not going to make it. Even for the hunters, they say, okay, like, let's end this suffering. Like this is unnecessary suffering right here, right? And so it is really interesting. And I think that we see some, we see discomfort with that just even among the human population as well, right? That we can't have in the United States, like being able to choose to die if you have a terminal illness is still not a possibility, right? Other countries in Europe, I think Switzerland is one where it happens where you can say, okay, I have a terminal illness. I'm still here, like my brain capacity is working enough to know that I'm dying, and I don't want to put my family through the suffering. I don't want to put myself through any more suffering. But we can barely even do that with humans, right? And, so I just think it's, it's really interesting. And it's just like this discomfort with death and kind of like what happens to our bodies and like, what does suffering mean it just kind of permeates across all of these things. It's very normal here if you have companion animals to euthanize them when they get old or when they get sick. And, there's a lot of discussion about, well, how do you tell, right? Like in it, if you have a companion animal, there usually is a point where you feel like, I mean, I myself have had, lived with a lot of animals and they've all gotten old or sick, right? And am I doing it because I'm the one that's being selfish because I can't handle their suffering anymore? That's not what the vet says. You know, the vets are telling me the animal, it's not having a quality of life anymore, right? So yeah, it's, you know, and then if you're thinking about like laboratory animals, in some instances, those animals may be forced to stay alive because we do want to see the suffering and experience the suffering because that is what we're trying to look at, right? If we're giving them a disease or testing something on them or something like that, right? Like we do want to prolong that process. So where you're located and which animal you might be talking about is really shaping the question of euthanasia and what does it mean to end suffering, right? Interesting question though, yeah.
Indian cities, Julie, like cities everywhere else in the world probably, are increasingly becoming animal-free spaces. And people are increasingly also claiming that urban public spaces are for humans, that animals belong only within the homes of urban denizens as companion animals, and animals on the streets are out-of-place animals who need to be put back in their place, meaning largely that either they need to be adopted or they need to be moved to shelters and sanctuaries. How do you feel about this? Are urban animals out of place?
Well, I have a lot of feelings about this. But my first question is, which animals are we talking about, right? Because, you know, are we talking about the songbirds? Are we talking about stray dogs? Are we talking about cows? In the case of India, we don't have cows on public streets here in the US. So which animals belong and don't belong are hugely important. And it's really, it's interesting and I guess somewhat disheartening to hear that this kind of purification process in these urban areas is happening in India as well, because I have never had the opportunity yet, fingers crossed someday, to visit India, you know, but it is such a place of entanglements that everywhere you go are people and animals, you know, and that experience is very true traveling in places, you know, in Africa that I've been able to go to. You know, it's like people and animals are visible everywhere kind of all the time, right? And the short answer is yes. Obviously, other species belong in urban areas because these are also their homes too, for a variety of reasons. You know, and so again, you have to kind of think about which category of animal. Are we thinking about wildlife? Are we thinking about domesticated animals? Are we thinking about livestock animals? And certainly, are we thinking about captive animals, whether they're in laboratories or zoos, right? Nobody's saying, oh, we need to get rid of the zoos because these animals are in urban areas, right? No, those animals are in their right place because they are in their appropriate exhibits or cages, right? And they're sort of under control. So it's a lot about animals that are perceived as being out of control, I think, in terms of controlling the city. And I think that, you know, in geography, there's been a lot of work looking at urban animal geographies. And one of the biggest person that has theorized on that has been Jennifer Walsh. And, you know, she's done a lot of work, written several pieces going all the way back to the mid-90s. And if I talk about things, I'm happy to email you all afterwards and I can provide like full citations so everybody can look them up. But, you know, she's done a lot of work trying to map out frameworks that help us learn to see animals in the city and where and how they've been made invisible or where and how the conflicts are happening, and why that's a problem, right? Like how if we're purifying the city from animals and controlling every aspect of it, that's moving us farther away from living in a multi-species world, right? And it's moving us farther away from kind of trying to negotiate daily life with multiple species versus just dominating them and saying, no, you have to go over here and go over here. And so Jennifer Walsh is a really important person to think about in terms of theorizing the animal. There's a couple cases that specifically have to do with dogs in urban areas. And if I could just briefly indulge myself in talking about them, I think that they are illuminating, because in one case here I worked on in Kansas City. And so I'm in Kansas City, for people that don't know where that is, which there's no reason you should. I'm literally right in the middle of the continental United States, smack dab in the middle. Kansas City has been around since the early 1800s. And it's probably, there's about 2 million people in our like the metro area, just to give you a little bit of idea of Kansas City itself, right? But Kansas City is a crazy dog place. People love dogs in Kansas City. Even in my neighborhood, I mean, people walk around with like baby strollers that have dogs in them. There's fancy dog shops. You can buy fancy, $5 like specialized dog cookies, shaped, well, now they're shaped like Halloween treats or something like that, right? There's dog parks where you can go and your dogs can be off leash, because we also have leash laws that say, you have to have your dog under control. And so here in Kansas City, somebody tried to open a new dog park and there was huge resistance to it, and, like local neighborhood resistance. And so we looked at that, and it was very fascinating, because there was this real bifurcation of people who felt that, like, first of all, dogs are part of my family, right? So I have a multi-species family, but other people felt like, no, I have dogs, but they're not part of my family. They're just sort of there, right? But people that said, well, I have a multi-species family, my family likes to go do things, which include going to dog parks and being in public places, we should all be allowed to do that. Other people said, no, parks are for people. Parks are specifically for kids. Parks are not for dogs. So it was this really interesting, like, boundary making process of the politics of this. Ultimately, the dog park was put in a location different from where the group wanted it to be, but the city did create a new dog park, and has since gone on to create multiple dog parks in parts of the city. But this idea that we live in a multi-species environment and we should be able to include animals in that is still very hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, right? But I think that, there's a geographer out of Australia, Yamini I'm not going to say her last name right, Narayargan. I'm so sorry, Yamini. But anyways, she's done some work on street dogs in India, and she's talking in looking at them as kind of like a subaltern species, and to say, look, they have a lot of agency. They're not actually out of place in the city. Like, the city is their place. They know how to live there. They know how to survive there. And in fact, a lot of humans have relationships with these street dogs, right? And so thinking about the role of some of these animals in the local community is also a helpful way to think about, why it's important to have animals be in place. And I think related to that, another geographer who was working with partners in India did some research on macaques. I feel like it was in New Delhi, but also maybe in another city in the country, where they were looking at the relationship between the macaque monkeys and how they're sort of begging for bananas, and like the tourists come and they buy the bananas from the banana vendors, and then then they just feed the macaques like the bananas right there, right? But these animals have developed relationships with these banana vendors that are actually like very interesting and very close relationships. And in addition, the animals themselves have in essence learned how to beg food from people, and they've changed their behaviors and their movements to adapt and communicate better with people. So they just all live here, right? We can't erase them, and that's controlling them is not going to work either, because there's always escapees in some way, shape, or form, right? But it really begs the question of, if we cannot allow some of these species that are very kind of, we think of as kindred species, like dogs to people, if people can't even have dogs in the cities, I mean, then much less like, animals that are considered pests, like rats or mice or coyotes or foxes, things that might come in and basically eat your pets or attack your kids. becomes more and more complicated. So, you know, I just, there's a lot of geographical work thinking about animals in the city and how different cities over time have also tried to push animals out. You know, a lot of cities in the US used to have livestock, you know, in a lot of homes, chickens, even cows, sheep. All of that got pushed out into sort of like the CAFO situation, you know, certainly by like the post-World War II period, right? But lots of cities in the world still live every day with all of these other species mixed together, right? So purifying that is a political process, and it's just, it makes it so hard to actually move forward with kind of what I think of as kind of like a multi-species sense of the world, that we're all here sharing space, right? So I don't know, I'll leave it at that and see if you all have any follow-up questions. So.
You mentioned rats also as, you know, one of the species that inhabit cities, which is completely true. And I have a question on that, but I see that Renu has raised her hand. Renu, would you like to go first?
Yes, I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Julie. Actually, this is not a follow-up question, but it's related. So my question is, I'm curious to know your comment on a particular paradoxical situation related to cats in countries like USA and Canada. So on one hand, we know urbanization has led to cats becoming the favorite pet animal or companion animal in geographically Western nations, and they are celebrities, cat influencers, huge merchandise. On the other hand, we also know that the feral cat population in these countries are on the rise, which are actually a problem, a threat to the local small animal population in many places, and are called as a local nuisance. So how has urbanization led to the creation, what do you think led to the creation of these two paradoxical and conflicted realities of the same existence of the same species? Thank you, Julie. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You know, that's a really great question. I suppose if I knew that, I probably could write a really good book and get a lot of people to read it, right? Cats. I mean, I'm a cat person. I don't know how many people listening today are cat people, but cats cause a lot of problems, and cats can be very, very controversial. And Renu is right that cats are, you know, it's always like the joke that cats are like the dominant thing on the internet, right? That it's just, you know, watching cat videos is very relaxing for me, but somehow watching cats be fools is apparently funny to everybody in the world, I guess. But the rise of feral cats and the issue of feral cats and even outdoor cats, right? It continues to be a controversy because of, you know, not only can feral cat populations just be nuisances to humans in terms of spraying, cat fighting, kind of the noises, which is also really true for feral dogs as well, getting into trash, things of that nature. You know, but they can have an impact on local urban ecosystems. And so there's a lot of kind of conflict right now between especially people interested in urban wildlife and urban cat keeping, and all cat, you know, with taking positions that all cats should be kept indoors, that no cat should be able to go outside. And you know, what do we do with the feral cat populations? Do we do what's called trap, neuter, release, which is called TNR, which I believe is also part of the population control programs that are happening in India, where you're trying to basically capture the cats and spay or neuter them and then release them to have whatever life they have left, as long as they're not reproducing, right? You know, some of the complications of that are that, well, people keep dumping cats, right? And you also can't catch all the cats to spay and neuter all the cats, and who's going to pay for all of that? You know, city planners don't want to pay for something like that, so it's left mostly to rescue groups who use their own time and money to do something like that. And so I think that even cat people can be frustrated with feral cats because it's a concern to their own livelihoods, to their own relationships with cats. But then a lot of other people can also just use this to push for kind of this purification of get these cats out of here, right? And they are paradoxical concepts, but at the same time, I think that, you know, as I've learned more and more to think about what it means to think from a geographical perspective about animals, you know, a lot of my time is spent thinking about, well, how do we create better relationships? How do we help other people see animals or learn to appreciate them or have empathy for them or something? But it's also true that at times animals are a problem, right? Like they can cause a lot of damage, they can cause conflict, they can spread disease. And so how do we balance that out, right? And I think ultimately, Renu, is that we have to live inside of these contradictions somehow in order to figure out our way through, right? Saying all or nothing on either side ultimately doesn't really work. It's not going to change the feral cat population or the feral dog population. And then it's also just going to continue to make people resentful about whatever it is that you're trying to do or whatever laws you're laying down, or if you're just leaving the feral cats there. So in rural areas, it's different. There's a lot more space. You know, animals can go and they can move around. There's, you know, people are not as close together. Problems in rural areas are very different just because of the spatial dimension of it, right? But living inside some of these paradoxes in trying to even just see those paradoxes at the same time can sometimes be very difficult, you know, even for me. And I've been trying to think about this stuff for a long time now. So I don't know if that's an answer, but at least it's how I'm thinking about it, I suppose, is the best way to put it.
Thank you, Julie. That has helped me. Thank you.
So now from cat to rat, Julie, my rat question. In your wonderful book, you discuss how norms of legitimate animal practice are neither consistent nor universal, and you talk about power as an important category. Very recently, the state of Telangana, which is where I live, has banned the use of lethal mouse traps, what we call glue pads here. Only non-lethal traps can henceforth be used to capture the mice and release them outdoors. To the best of my knowledge, rat poison is not outlawed yet. So there is an acceptable way of killing mice, which is by poison, and an unacceptable way, which is by glue pads, which has been determined by the state. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think this is a very excellent example of paradoxical attitudes towards animals here, right? It would be really interesting to understand why that law got put into place. You know, was there, you know, I mean, we have the glue traps here in the United States, and they're very controversial here too. They're very grisly. You know, it's like basically just the flat paper that's very sticky, and an animal gets stuck on it, and it basically just slowly dies because it can't move. Right? It's very traumatic if you've ever seen a video of this or you've ever like experienced it, you know, in person. Just because for a person like me, it's like all you can think about is the suffering, and oh my gosh, like just, you know, like this is just terrible. This is the wrong way to do things, right? So it would be really interesting to see what the story was around this. You know, did some politician have some really traumatic event where they actually witnessed a mice slowly suffering and they were like, my God, like we have to change this? Or did some group of people just get up in arms because it happened in their apartment building and they could put pressure to make the law? You know, the stories of these micro geographies and the politics of these micro geographies can be very helpful and very illuminating. I think that, again, in a situation like this, where you have this paradoxical law, this is another area where animal advocates and biologists and veterinarians can actually work together, right? Because what we have in this situation, if you're going to say you can't use glue traps, but you can put out poison, is that you're going to have predators that are going to eat those animals that are dying from eating the poison. And then you're just kind of like pushing that poison up the food web. Or that poison is somehow going to be, eaten by other animals, whether it's animals that you might want, songbirds or possums or whatever good animals there might be in the city, or get in the water supply, right? And you just you have poison released into the water supply. So it's like the case of glue traps versus poison. Yes, the glue traps are just kind of horrific in their own right and can often catch like non-target species. But the ramifications of continuing to put out poison are so much bigger than like a single animal that gets stuck on the glue trap, right? So what prevented the government from actually taking what I would say is a very small logical step to say, oh, well, like maybe we have to look at all types of non-lethal methods, right? And putting out poison, I know here in the US, I mean, not even just about mice. I mean, people putting out poison, to target, like people will put out poison contaminated meat to try and kill wolves or coyotes or, predators that they don't want around. Well, then what happens is that like all of the scavenger species come and eat those. And then you have the vultures that die or the eagles that are dying from eating the poison. And it's, those chains of connections really ripple out in so many ways. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that, again, these opportunities for cross connection and the opportunities to reveal, I don't want to say it's purposeful hypocrisy for this particular strange law and how it came out, but it's clear that they didn't think it through all the way somehow, right? So why didn't that happen is a really interesting question. And why did it happen in that place and, not the whole state or not federally by the Indian government, right? Again, speaks to some of those microgeographies.
Well, one of the possibilities would be that this has economic explanations behind it. Maybe it's just the rat poison making industry that needed a little push or knew the right people, pushed the right buttons, and therefore the other method of killing rats is eliminated from the market and then they rule again, so bigger profits. I don't know, maybe that's the simpler explanation. And it has nothing to do with sympathy,
Right. It's possible, yeah. I mean, or maybe kids were sticking their hands in the glue trap. I have no idea, right?
Yeah, that poison is also a cheaper alternative, I guess.
Right. And you probably don't have to see the animal, right? The animal go off quietly somewhere else and pass away versus like you're stuck like watching the animal in that glue trap spend 3 days until it dies, right? So it's a lot easier to throw the poison out, don't have to think about it anymore.
So since we are running out of time, I will come quickly to my last question, unless someone else wants to go first.
There's a question in the chat, Anu. Maybe you can read it out.
Sure. So this is a question from Barsha. In a country like India, the discourse of animal studies is not limited to harmless or pet animals alone. There are many people who face survival issues under attacks of wild animals like tigers and elephants. What about the areas where people have to struggle with animals just to survive?
Yes, this is a hugely important question. I appreciate this question because it is a very complex question for, I think, especially for animal studies scholars and animal geographers who, again, have spent so much of our time and energy trying to get people to see animals and think about building positive relationships and ending suffering, right? And so this kind of question really gets to the heart also of is animal studies or animal geographies or something, are we prioritizing animals over humans and kind of, reversing some sort of hierarchy here, and ignoring like very real experiences of people every day on the ground. And I know, here in America, we don't have tigers and elephants rampaging through our gardens. We have deer who cause trouble, but they're not going to eat you or kill you like a tiger might, right? And I think that there was a really fascinating paper by an animal geographer, Margulis, and it was just published in 2019 in the journal Political Geography. And he was actually looking at a man-eating tiger, I want to say in Kerala State. Is that,
No,
I think
it
that's
was
the
in
southern part.
Karnataka. It was
It
in
was where?
Karnataka. I think it was in Karnataka.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. Yeah. So there was supposedly, a person had been attacked by a tiger, right? And so he did I thought, a very powerful job of providing the complex history of, the sort of what was going on before British colonization, how this particular area changed under British colonization, and how the people that are working in this area, there are a lot of tea plantations there, and a lot of those laborers live very precarious lives. They don't get paid a lot of money, and they're out there every day working right on the edge of these reserve areas where there are tigers, and elephants. And so it can be very dangerous, right? And in his perspective, he was kind of talking about this whole story and talking about how the state had, designated this area. This is where the tigers should be. This is where the tigers can't be. This is where the people can be. This is where the people can't be. And so he's showing us all of these boundaries and territories that are being created. But when the people are having to face, okay, is there a tiger out there that could be wounded or could be starving, but I need to go to work? What are we supposed to do in those situations? In those situations, are we capable of prioritizing human beings over tiger lives in these moments, right? And so I think that, there's a lot of powerful work that can, this is a great sort of research direction for people to take, is what happens when animals are sort of too much of a problem for people. At some point, we have to make decisions, right? Not every single person and every single animal can live in the same place at one time. And as humans, we at this point in time have more capacity to control that situation. So how do we do that is the key, right? And in some cases that may result in losing animals over people, because that's just the politics of the situation. Is it right or wrong? It depends on the location, right? But it certainly feels like having that discussion and recognizing that that these are real struggles for people is an important part of animal geographies. And I think just to point out one more piece that I just was thinking about, there was an article by Callie Doubleday where she was looking at the Saritska Tiger Preserve. And this area, again, is an area where individual humans are, tigers had historically been in this area. People had been able to, they knew these tigers, they had relationships with these tigers, but then they were extirpated from the area in like 2005. And so this whole project she was looking at a reintroduction of new tigers into this area. And what she found was really fascinating, because the local people really liked the old tigers, even though sometimes they caused problems and damaged crops or scared people, or probably at some point even killed somebody. But there was a sense that the tigers and the animals they understood each other, that there was a communication across species of, hey, look, this is our place, this is your place, maybe you come here at night, but then you go away during the day, we come in the day, we'll go away at night. It's kind of, we figured it out. But the new tigers, they didn't understand any of those cultural norms, right? They were just, they were seen as like these invading tigers who didn't know their proper place. And so it actually was generating a lot more conflict, because the people they were afraid of these tigers. They didn't have these relationships with these tigers, right? And so it's just, it is just very interesting to think about how people have to negotiate all of this, right? And then, you know, there's even work on the gender dimensions of this, right? In many cases, women are out foraging for firewood or having to collect water, and the women may be more particularly vulnerable to attacks by wildlife than men because of different roles in different areas. Certainly that can be very true in places like Africa as well. So I think that's a really great question. And I guess that's just kind of offering you some ways that geographers have tried to think about it.
Vidyam wanted to say something.
First of all, Julie, thank you so much and also your book. Yes, I really loved it. And you talked about geography, and it just came to my mind about like the situation in my state where I come from. It is in Assam, a northeastern state in India. I was just thinking about like probably 2 points. I'm sorry, like we're running out of time, but I just couldn't really saying something. First of all, this geography of the animals, and then I was just thinking about the colonial concept of the wasteland in Assam, basically those grasslands, and then we had these buffalo herders, and then because the colonial officers, they always look at it like about this unenclosed economy, and to make this profit-oriented crops and this and that, and then they had problem to kind of with this wasteland because those were not properly cultivated, but not really untouched by humans. I mean, the local population are also many graziers from Nepal. They used to live there, and then they had these buffalo herds, and wild buffaloes would come, and the point is, it was like even those buffaloes from the herds, like from buffalo herders, it was neither wild nor domestic, kind of in between. And the Britishers were always surprised to see that one could hardly distinguish the wild buffaloes from the domestic ones from every behavior. And also the owners had to make sounds to communicate with them. That was the only connection they had. I mean, that was, this, but now it's kind of disappearing. And so is the wild buffalo population in Assam. Almost it's so anyway, the second point is you just meant someone just asked about this tiger and elephant attacks. I mean, this is what has been happening in my state now, and if I'm not wrong, perhaps Assam has the highest density of wild elephants in Asia or something. I mean, about the tiger attack, again, the buffalo herders in those areas, they're still there in Assam. Unfortunately, most of them are in vernacular language. So, but anyway, I was reading some books, and then the experience of some forest officials and their encounters with those herders. And of course, they are trained in the colonial way. So they always have this differentiation in mind that it is wild or this is domestic. But then the attitude of the buffalo herders, because sometimes a tiger would take 1 or 2 buffaloes, and then also people are attacked. But there was an account by an ex-forest official from Assam, and he was surprised to say that because the buffalo herder was telling him, it is His Majesty's domain. His Majesty is the tiger. And then, of course, it's whenever he wants, you'd keep one for himself. I mean, if I quote it like directly from his statement. So it is not like killing a buffalo, but the king would keep something for himself. And secondly, and we are not supposed to interfere in that. So if we do that, the tiger would definitely attack people. I mean, that was one kind of attitude I was just reading. And then about the elephants, I mean, that till date, despite the conflicts, what I have found is the vocabulary people use for either for tiger, also for the elephants, it's like elephants come to the paddy field, of course, kind of destroy it. But most of these native areas, what we like all these newspapers and all, or the all these say narratives, what one sees is this attitude towards the elephants. Again, they are not considered, at least not yet considered as vermins. They would still say like the laws are here, or like they would chase the elephants away, but they also believe that if the elephants come to your field, then it's a sign of good harvest. So, and I was like, maybe I could mail Anu and Susan a few videos that I have on my phone, like I receive it from my friends from there. So, and there is this differentiation, I mean, in tea garden areas of Assam and in other areas, like where you have the conflict with elephants. And I was also wondering, because I was asking people like why like many incidents in the tea garden areas, you have seen, like you could see people shouting, and there was a recent video, very disturbing, like last month, a person was trampled by elephants because like the elephant herd was passing and then people were shouting and throwing stones, and then one was killed, one person. That's last night I was watching another video sent by like today morning in India. And again, the elephant herd was passing by and then no one said anything. And they were also calm. I mean, again, that is a tribal area. I don't know, but I was also thinking about this, this connection, say, where people have lived or coexisted for centuries. The attitude is very different. I was talking to one of my friends in Rajasthan, and like we're talking about these vocabs we have related to animals, and then the Vishnoi and then he said the Vishnoi community in Rajasthan, they have so many words in their language which my friend doesn't have or doesn't know, because they didn't have that connection to the wild animals. I don't know, it just came to my mind after like listening to you all, so thought of sharing it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing your stories and your experiences. It is really interesting to think about kind of like what might the different cultural practices around these historically, when people have been able to have, I guess for ease of phrasing, just like a positive relationship with the tigers and elephants that live around them, and they somehow all figure it out, right? But like, are there different cultural practices, even within India around that, or does everybody respond the same way? It would be interesting, again, sort of more micro geography. But I think that it also speaks a little bit to this idea that, humans have an experience of place, have a sense of place themselves, right? And so do these other animals. And it's like, in the situations where communities are able to have effective engagement and effective relationships, I mean, which sometimes those might break down. They might break down on the human side because a human becomes aggressive, and they might break down on the animal, the non-human animal side, because a tiger or an elephant is upset or hurt or whatever, is hungry, right? But that there is like a shared experience of living in places. And, and a lot of human wildlife conflict is trying to understand, what does this look like, Like you have your territory, I have mine. Even I have to talk to the ants every spring around my house. I say, excuse me, hello. Like, I appreciate that all the ants want to like come out and it's warm, but please don't come inside my house. Usually they don't listen to me, right? So then I have to decide what to do, which again is like ridiculous comparison to people that are living with tigers and elephants, I know, but just put up with my weird life that I have here. But we all have this experience of place, right? So it's like, if we're thinking about addressing human wildlife conflict, how do we do that, acknowledging the human's experience of place as well as the animal's experience of place and what they need? Do the elephants need quiet passage through a field? okay, maybe the human culture can learn how to provide a quiet passage through the field, and that would stop something, because they can also be seen as sort of good luck, that the elephant wanted to come through my field. It must mean I'm going to have a good crop this year. You know, again, like these paradoxes are going on, right? But looking at that and exploring that is definitely something that, you know, is super geographical, and addresses these issues of territory and place in inhabiting the shared world. Like, we live in a shared world, you know, and we can't purify that world any more than we can purify the city, right?
All right, so we'll just jump to the last question because we are unfortunately running out of time. Julie, how can animal studies scholars from various disciplinary backgrounds, such as the ones that we have in our collective, benefit from an engagement with the new animal geography?
Well, we could all become geographers. No, I'm just kidding. The animal geographers have learned as much from all the other disciplines as we have kind of been learning and teaching and developing ourselves. And I think that one of the big contributions that animal geographers make to the larger project of animal studies are really these questions of place and space, in border making, right? And that we have to. Geography has been so foundational to me because it's helped me see animals in a way that I would not have been able to just coming from an ecofeminist perspective. I want to now, when I read about any, you know, animal studies piece, I want to know where it is. I want to know how it is related to other places. I want to know the scale of whatever is being talked about. I want to know what kind of boundaries and borders are we talking about here? Are they cultural boundaries? Are they political boundaries? Are they, you know, are they economic boundaries or national boundaries? And I think that another contribution that geographers make is our tendency to kind of layer and layer and layer, right? Like we, you know, I had, when I was doing my PhD, one professor, and we did give her a hard time, but it was okay because she loved it. But she would kind of, you know, she'd teach her class and teach her lecture. And at the end of her lecture, her chalkboard was just a complete disaster. Like, you know, there was arrows and connections and circles and connecting to this and connecting to that, right? And we're like, oh my gosh, but you got it, right? You saw all the relationships kind of at one time. And so I think that animal geographers try very hard to actually tease apart all of the layers and kind of bring them back together in ways. And I think that that's just, you know, that comes from just kind of from our training and thinking about places and scales and space and borders, that it has to all happen at the same time, right? So, you know, I would encourage anybody that's interested. I'll go ahead and type before we get off here. I'm just going to type it in right now. If anybody is interested, I'm happy to answer people's emails. I'm putting that in. And I'm also putting in the animal geography specialty group. And if you just type that in, like whatever search, that will come up. And that is the association within the Association of American Geographers. And but they do have some resources on that page and kind of some newsletters, and you can kind of take a look at those and say, okay, is there something here that might apply to the research that I'm interested in? And I would also say, if you do read something by any geographers, reach out to them directly. Like, you know, we all like to talk and we all like to share. And this is why doing something like this is really just so much fun, right? Because all the ideas keep bouncing around, right? I've already had like 10 new ideas bouncing around in my head while we've been talking. And you know, I really enjoy that.
Yeah, we've had you today as our first animal geographer, and Yamini Narayanan's agreed to come on board in early 2022. So yeah,
Yes.
we're looking forward to that as well. Thank you so much, Julie. This was completely wonderful. I enjoyed myself tremendously, and I'm fairly certain everybody else did too. I hope you enjoyed the encounter with the Indian Animal Studies Collective too.
Yes, no, I did for sure. And thank you so much again, Anu and Susan, for inviting me. And thank you for everybody that joined today.
Have a nice evening, everyone, and see you at the next table talk. Bye-bye.
Bye.